pleasure in a few moments to introduce you to the founder of Talking Trees and Safe Space. I'd like to share a few moments with you about our first meeting and a progression is that I have seen from somebody who met her and then to where she is today. I first met her. I didn't meet her. I saw her. She was bench pressing more weight than I could. Well, you take notice of that. And I started watching this lady because it wasn't just her bench pressing, it was the intensity at which she attacked the exercise. And it wasn't that she could jog for 2 hours on the treadmill. It was the focus that she had as she jogged. And then you would see her out running in the street. It was amazing. And then we found out they were also, both of us, professors, and so our relationship started to build, not just in the gym, but as professors. And then a friendship evolved. And there were many times that I was sitting in my office or in her office, and we were talking, and it was her eyes. In her eyes was a secret. You could see it, but I had no clue. But there was a secret there. And then I understood, after she explained it, I understood the intensity of attacking the exercises. So one day, I feel very, very blessed because she told me the secret. 40 years of secret. Today she's different than she was when I first met her. By releasing the secret, she gained a new passion. And that passion is represented here today. And thanks to all of you for being here to help her in that passion. Her whole point is, if as adults we can't share the secret, if we don't, as a culture, allow people to come forward and speak openly without judgment, criticism, questioning, how in the world, if that's true with adults, how in the world are we going to get one of our children to come forward and tell their secret? And there's lots of secrets out there. Too many secrets. So today, it's the 5th shot. First shot, 2010, Talking Trees. Beautiful play. About some of the voices that were going on in our head. Beautiful play. In 2011, we had an opportunity to work with the photography department in creating a collage. And I would invite you, if you have not seen it, to go to Building 3 West, and in the hallway, you will see the biggest collage there hanging on the wall. Beautifully done. 7 beautiful women surrounded by broken glass. And on there, there's an age. And the age is when this sexual abuse began. Powerful. Powerful. The next year, that collage went to all DMAC campuses along with a workshop, again trying to explain why safe space is so important. Then last year on Saturday, a whole day of workshop again devoted. And today you are part of the 2014 Safe Space. There will be a 2015. And hopefully all of you can, from now until then, in the 2016, all the rest of your life, be sensitive, be open to allow people to share so they don't feel that they have to keep their secret. So I'd like you now to welcome to the stage this woman that is also a third-degree black belt. Who said, Buzz, you will? I said, yes. Dr. Rosenna.
I'm the one supposed to be eliciting the tears. Stop that. Wow, just let me be speechless for a second. Thank you all for being here. I see friends, supporters, my new family, and I'm touched and overwhelmed. Oh, and before the first teardrop fall, I'm going to stop so we can get there. Jim Stick, will you stand, please? I hope you get a chance. I know you're very busy. I appreciate you even coming in here. Jim Stick is the Dean of Behavioral Sciences. He doesn't like me to call him boss, but I get boss for me is a wonderful thing when you can proudly say, that's my boss, and I proudly say, that's my boss. And I do have a little story that I'll share about why he's so important to me, so I hope you get to stick around for a little bit here today, because I know you're real busy. This is my Facebook family, my Survivor family. I'm just overwhelmed and touched. So for all of you, for whatever reason that you came here today, I hope that this is meaningful for you as well. So with that, I will begin. This afternoon, I'm going to take you on a journey. I have no idea where the journey will lead you, but I bet it's going to take you away from your comfort zone. So I'm just going to ask you that as you feel yourself slipping away, or you feel your comfort zone slipping away, that I want you to know that this is safe space. It is okay to cry. It is okay to laugh. It is okay to reach over and hold a person's hand next to you. Don't grab anything else. But I think a hand will be okay. You are not alone here. If you have brought your pain, that's okay. If you have brought your concern, that's okay. If you have some love to give, that's certainly welcomed. Because this is what safe space looks like. And this is what safe space feels like. And our job today is to make sure that we can create this sort of environment when we leave outside of those doors. So, whether you are here to support or here for extra credit, we're here today and we're going to journey together. We're making Iowa history as we gather these types of communities together. When we talk about community people, we talk about community professionals, we talk about students and professors. This is the making of history in Iowa. How many of you have been to, heard of, seen, have talked about environments like this, where survivors of childhood trauma come together to share and open up as one? This is DMAC history, as we have for the first time a panel of survivors convinced to live openly, scared to death, like, Rosenna, what have you gotten us into? And I have promised them that it's going to be okay, because at DMAC here, we have safe space. Thanks to you all. We're even making national history as Talking Trees has moved forward in incorporating as a not-for-profit organization. I, as the executive director of Talking Trees, Ronnie Cyrus, if you will stand and take your bow. Yes, you, ma'am. As my assistant executive director of Talking Trees. Again, all parts are coming together of this beautiful tree blossoming, and you are part of that, and I thank you. I'm going to begin with the task, because we are in school, so I just feel like I need to give you something to do. You have 2 index cards. I'm going to ask you to take out the first one. You'll give them both to us before you leave here. If you don't have one, could you raise your hand and someone will give you the 2 cards. Can you see who do not have cards? Where are our index cards? We have more left, I hope. Oh.
I got it.
Okay. We have some more. Raise your hand and we'll get you some. There's some back there. You need each person needs 2. So if you don't have 2, raise your hand and we'll get you some.
So is that 2 hands need 4?
Okay. Don't write your names on them, by the way. I won't grade them. I'm just going to collect them. So. What you're going to do with that first card is you're going to keep it near, and throughout my presentation today, I'm just going to make the statement, write a word. When I ask you to write a word, I simply want you to write a word on that card that reflects how you're feeling at that time. So I'm going to give you, it doesn't have to be the first word that comes to your head, so you don't have to rush out a thought, but I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to a minute for you to think and then write a word that you're thinking at that time. And so you're going to do, there's going to be 3 times where you're asked to do that. So just keep that one near. Okay, we have a couple of more. Do we have enough, Buzz? Okay, we have someone up here. Before we start, I have a gift that I cannot give away, for I have tried and tried. The gift that keeps on giving are the tears that I cry. But everywhere I turn, people turn away from my pain. They turn their back with a silent request for me to look like a picture in a frame. I am too beautiful, too special, too smart to carry such anguish. Talking about pain is like speaking a foreign language. Now, some cultures give you 48 hours to bury the dead, but the pain I carried got buried in my head because there was no proper mourning for the child that died, so I carried her around inside of me like she was still alive. Now, she seemed to be invisible to everyone else, so I created voices in my head to talk to her. I thought they would help me protect her. Instead, they too rejected her. So as I got tired of carrying all of the dead weight around, along with the voices in my head and all of their sounds, I reached out to you and you and you. But you told me to forget about her too. Songs tell me to smile, even though I hurt, just smile. Friends tell me to be strong because just one of my tears is big enough to drown a relationship. And family thinks that my pain is just a figment of my imagination. I am too beautiful, too special, too smart. So the voices in my head keep fighting and healing never starts. Meanwhile, the ones who murdered my childhood walk around free while I spend 40 years trying to resuscitate me. How do you revive a heart that's gone cold? How do you save the life of a 7-year-old trapped inside of the body of a grown lady with a brilliant mind, but who cries like a baby? Now, there were occasional pauses in the pain and new signs of life, like when I gave birth and when I became a wife. The voices in my head finally went to sleep. For a while, the hurt didn't cut so deep because the pain became numb from mothering tasks, because even the voices in my head could not keep up with the questions that my children asked. So finally, I get to live through a childhood. Yes, vicariously mine. My inner child got along with my real life children just fine. In fact, she was so excited she could finally play and feel safely alive. It's like the little girl inside of me never died. But real life children grow up and move away. While my traumatized child, she didn't age a day. She and her pain sit invisibly still, slowly but surely losing her will to reach out, to go on, to invite others in, while hoping that someone would see beyond the grown-up grin. But I am too beautiful, too special, too smart. The world needs me to play my part, show the rewards for living with perfection. Success doesn't come with heartfelt compassion. So today, I offer you this gift. The gift that usually gets dismissed, like Monday's junk mail that gets thrown into a pile of recycled paper until trash day, when the city becomes responsible for taking it away. Now, before you tell me that it's going to be all right, can you hear what I have to tell? Can you honor the fact that the pain inside of me runs as deep as a well? Before you put your arms around me to say, I am too beautiful and too special and too smart, can you listen to my aching heart? And before you wipe the tear from my eye, can you acknowledge that I am hurting? And for one moment in time, can you please just help me carry my burden? Because there is nothing spiritual about being so strong that your strength covers up your perpetrator's wrong. And there is nothing godly about holding back a tear. Courage has nothing to do with hiding fear. And if you think that pain is what makes a survivor stronger, you need to listen just a little bit longer to what I have to tell you about what I've been through. Please don't dismiss me like the others do. See, I still mourn for the childhood that I never had. And thoughts that I am unlovable still make me sad. And I have yet to silence the voices that argue amongst themselves so loud in my head that I feel so insecure and sometimes wish that I were dead. Pain does not build you up. It brings you down. And it is only in the sharing of pain where healing can be found. But you dismissed my pain so that you can ignore your own. You refuse to cry as a sign of being grown. So I've come to realize my pain isn't just about me. It was meant to be shared to set others free. Sharing my pain is a gift to you. Please don't dismiss me like the others do. Use it to recognize your own healing to be done. I know that I am not the only one. This poem is intended to create space. Stop chasing away pain in such haste. Embrace your own pain and sit with it for a spell, long enough for it to become your testimony to tell. Now, I may not understand your pain, but I will give you space to explore it. Bring me your tears and tell me you hurt, and I promise I will not ignore it. Because if you could follow the tracks of my tears, you would be glad that I'm finally here. Enfold me in your arms and open your ears. Tell me you will listen and promise to hear what I cannot put into words. Even these words don't suffice. For every single word I've stated, I have cried twice. What I am desperately trying to convey to you may fall from my eyes, not just come from my lips. And I hope the next time that you hear someone cry, that my gift to you will stick. Write a word. All right. How many of you know someone with cancer? Raise your hand. In 2012, the estimated number of cancer survivors was almost 14 million. How many of you know someone who's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse or incest? In 2012, the estimated number of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse was over 40 million. But we don't talk about that. That seems to be the invisible and the secret, well-kept secret. So we see services all around for survivors of many things, except for childhood sexual abuse and incest. And I'm going to tell you why safe space for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse and incest is so important. Because sometimes when you say sexual abuse, people say, oh yeah, we hear about sexual abuse all the time. And that's true, we do hear a lot about sexual abuse. But we don't hear a lot about survivors of childhood sexual abuse and incest. And this is why it's so important. One of the greatest indicators of success in terms of people being able to live their lives fully who have experienced childhood sexual abuse is whether or not they disclosed during childhood. So whether or not they told someone during childhood and what happened, and that something positively happened as a consequence of them disclosing. So what happens is in childhood, what we talk about now, for example, is with prevention. So prevention is a wonderful thing, obviously. But what happens with prevention means that when someone is identified as being a victim of sexual abuse in childhood, they have a pretty good chance of fully healing from that experience. Because someone says, yes, we are sorry for your experience and we are making things better for you. There is an attempt to make things better. That attempt somehow, and that's an overstatement because it's not, I'm making it sound easier than it is, but what's helpful is the fact that that is acknowledged. Okay? So there's already a head start whenever it gets acknowledged in childhood. That doesn't happen with adult survivors. So most of the adult survivors, of the 40 million, half of us who never tell, we're already behind the 8 ball. And we've never told. So most of us, 80% of childhood sexual abuse victims do not tell during childhood. So there's only a small number of victims that occur in childhood that actually disclose at some time, or somebody finds out sometime within childhood. Total, about 50% tell eventually, but that eventually is usually into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. Right? So 50% never tell at all. They take it to their grave. Okay. So the fact that adult survivors, most of us have never told anyone, as Buzz mentioned, keep it a secret, means that we have a lot of issues to work through when that secret finally comes out. The other group that gets recognized, of course, are adult victims of sexual assault. Now, the special thing about adult victims, and again, I'm making it sound easier, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying there are some issues there that separate the experience from being an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, because there's nothing easy about being a survivor of sexual abuse whenever it occurs. But one of the things that happens is when an adult survivor is when an adult is a victim of sexual assault, there are several things that are different. One, they don't have the memory issues that we have as children. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So they remember the experience. They know. They don't go around doubting. Again, on some levels, people do this. But generally, they know when they've been sexually assaulted or raped. And again, they're the only ones, the ones who probably don't know are the ones who were survivors from childhood. We're still not sure, right? But generally, if someone does not have that experience, people know what that experience is. They're not doubtful about that experience. So one, they know what it is that they're addressing. Two, assuming that there was no previous sexual abuse, they know what normal is. They have this idea of what they're missing, what's lacking. Adult survivors don't get to experience normal when not normal or dysfunction occurred at age 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So sometimes talking to adult survivors about the healing process and getting back to what could be conceived some normal patterns of life, it's like trying to describe what a rose looks like to a blind man or woman. So because of that, because we don't have the sense of normal, okay, good or bad or right or wrong, because we have this overwhelming lack of sense of normalcy within us. And we've carried this guilt and shameful secret for so long, then there needs to be a space that's carved out where we're not trying to fit into somebody else's healing paradigm. And that has not been niched out yet for us. That is the job of Talking Trees. That is the goal of Talking Trees. That is the emphasis of Talking Trees and saying we need some recognition of our own to heal. We need some space of our own to heal where we can address issues of memory loss and how difficult that is to recover when sometimes you're not even sure when it took place or when it started or who the violators were. We need a place where we can where people can begin to understand our overwhelming sense of not ever feeling normal or not ever feeling like we have a place where we really fit in with this world. We need a place where people understand us when we start talking about the voices in our head that we create for ourselves, trying to find the same place. And Lord knows that is not it. Right? But we don't know that till later. So we need a place when we start talking about the guilt and shame that we live with. We need people that understand that. And we need safe places where people aren't just telling us, obviously, to get over it or it's okay. And that's it. We need places where we can explore our past. Not because we want to be stuck there, but because we know that there's some spaces that have to be understood. And we need creative spaces that can help us to come understand, like the presentation that Dr. Newkirk did this morning, to say, you know what, hey, yeah, there's probably some trauma going on. It's not just your weak will that's happening, but you probably have some real trauma. There's a number of people walking around with post-traumatic stress that has never been identified. No one probably looks at me when I'm bench pressing my body weight or running for 2 hours on a treadmill or kicking somebody in the head who's 6 feet tall. Looks at me probably. Now I'm not the person someone looks at and say, she probably has post-traumatic stress, but I do. And so we need to carve out spaces for people to have a place where they can heal. Okay. The other major issue for adult survivors that separates them from childhood victims that get identified in childhood and adult victims, which is huge, is the issue of family. And this is also the scariest part, I think, for society in general, is the issue of family. I can't think off the top of my head of another crime that gets committed and people are told to totally, completely ignore or forgive their violators and perpetrators, except incest. Incest is a crime. But really, ironically, the message that we give based on our actions and a difficulty of bringing people to justice and keeping them in prison is that the moral of the story is that if you want to rape somebody, make sure they're related to you. That's a horrible, horrible, horrible message that we give to people. They are the most difficult violators or perpetrators to convict. And it's not just the legal issue. We wish it were just the legal issue. But it's the issue that come down from the family members, the matriarchs, the patriarchs, the religion that you go to. If it's the pastor of the church and they're related to you, we don't want to be embarrassed in the church. We don't want to be kept out of the family reunions. So it's the only crime I can think of where systematically people ask you to continue to share space with your violators. And for many years, and for many of us, we do. And I can't tell you the damage that does to us psychologically. So we need our own safe space to heal. Oftentimes when people do disclose, even if it's when you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, even if it is when you're still in your childhood, oftentimes the victim is not even believed, period. They're not believed. Even by their own family members, they're not believed. No way. Because we have in our idea this monstrous looking person or evil person that comes out and do these things. So people are not willing to believe this is the person who's a model citizen in society. Or it's the person who's the breadwinner, who takes care of the family. Or it's the person who buys the biggest Christmas gifts or carves the turkey. People don't want to believe that, and so they don't. So oftentimes survivors are not believed. Then there are those who are believed, especially when disclosure happens in adulthood, and we're just told to get over it. It was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. Get over it. Or that's just what people do. Or they were just kidding. Or that's what men do. Or everybody goes through that. Get over it. And then there were some who will simply be believed but blamed for their own abuse. Blamed for it. It must have been something that the victim did. And we hear that a lot too when we talk about adult victims. What were you wearing? What were you doing? Somehow you must have provoked this or called this upon yourself. And then there are some, like me, who will be believed but directly requested to keep the secret, to protect the family. Why does this phenomenon exist? And I've asked this question over the last couple of years. This has been one of the things that I feel like I've really had to try to get to the bottom of. And I think I have at least a little piece of the answer thanks to some recent research on adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, is research that has been going on actually for the last 10 years. It's become very popular. It finally has gotten to Iowa within the last year, where we look at 10 pronounced childhood experiences that we think severely negatively contribute to child development. Those include emotional neglect, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, having a family member in prison, having a divorce or parental separation, witnessing family violence, and mental illness. And substance abuse, that's number 10. When just one of these negative consequences exist during childhood, then there's an increased likelihood of having adverse or negative adult experiences. So that's one thing. But then we found out some other things. So when we look at the ACEs research, what we find are a couple of things that are related to that. That's really, I think, very significant to understanding adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse and begin to put some of these pieces of the puzzle together for us. So when one of these experiences is present, just one, then physical, social, and emotional development may be compromised. With just one. In adulthood, living with a single ACE threatens the stability of family, community, relationships, and health. In fact, the ACEs research, the original research, looked at the consequences of ACEs in health. And here's an interesting tidbit. The reason why they started looking at ACEs in health is because one of the things that people figured out while we kept talking about these neurological, what we thought were these neurological consequences and social consequences of having adverse childhood experiences, it was so difficult for us to get evidence on it. One of the reasons was because we've come to live with it. And so somebody finally began to ask the question, then if people aren't going to mental health with these issues, where are they going? Someone finally came with some creative, ingenious idea and said, I bet they're going to the doctor. So when they first started doing the ACEs research, what they started doing, they actually did it by Kaiser Permanente, one of the most premier health organizations in the country. And they began collecting data from health organizations. And so they began comparing ACEs to the quality of physical health that people had. Things like asthma, even, and it's funny because if you were here the first session, Dr. Newkirk talked about the occipital lobe. That was one of the pieces of the brain that he talked about when he was talking about trauma. And that's the part of the brain that's related to vision, right? You're like, how can vision be related to trauma? I don't know, but what the research tells us is that people who have 4 or more ACEs are 400 times more likely to wear glasses. Who knew? Right? So trauma affects everything. I do have my contact lenses on. So it affects everything, including physical health. Now, so we've had to go through the back door. Now that we have all this information directly tying ACEs into physical health, we have been able to backtrack, and then now we're beginning to collect more data on things like dropping out of school and having less income and those sorts of direct social experiences. So ACEs have a cumulative effect. What that means is that where there is one ACE, there's likely to be 2. Where there are 2 ACEs, there's likely to be 3. Where there are 3 ACEs, there's likely to be 4. So every ACE that adds up has the potential to attach itself to another ACE. And that kind of makes sense. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Lastly, and most importantly that we found, there seems to be a threshold for ACEs in that the magic number seems to be 4. Once you get up to 4 ACEs, the chances of you having some sort of adverse adult experience is almost unavoidable. And that's physical experience as well as emotional or relational experience. So when we look at the whole realm of things from your health, looking at your health, from cardiac problems, your likelihood of smoking, your likelihood of becoming pregnant as being a teenager mother or having unwanted pregnancy, to things like divorce. They looked at grade point averages and a whole host of things. If you have 4 or more ACEs, then you have some work to do, right? So that's sort of the magic number that we've looked at. So it seems like the resilience decreases with the number of ACEs that we have. Why is this a huge boogeyman for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse? Now, the magic number is 4, and we know that ACEs accumulate. And we went over the list of what are the ACEs. If you are sexually abused, what does that mean? How many ACEs is that? That's at least 3 ACEs right there, right? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. So all you need, and if those 3 things are going on, what do you think is the likelihood that there's some alcohol, there's some sort of substance abuse, or at least minimally single parenting, or some mental health issues, something else is going on in that home. So there's a 50% chance that if you are an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, there's a 50% chance that you have an ACE score of at least 4 or more. That is significant, because one of the breakthroughs that mean for us, as painful as it may seem to look at this reality, things begin to make sense as we try to piece together why it's so complicated and difficult for us to fix ourselves. And one of the pieces that we didn't look at when we start struggling and dealing with, the emotional and neurological effects, and all we're trying to do is get through the sexual abuse, that becomes our focus. We can't get there if we're only dealing with the sexual abuse, when we have 4 or 5 or 6 more ACEs that we haven't even uncovered yet. So that's been part of the issue as people begin to deal with sexual abuse, whether they deal with it in therapy or with their friends or with their family. We can't get to it because what we haven't acknowledged for the longest time is that sexual abuse was the manifestation of the other junk. So even if you're trying to deal with the sexual abuse, you're not going to get very far, because you haven't dealt with the underlying issues of why that was created in the first place, what allowed that to happen. So what happens, for example, in a normal family, this idea of normal, if this were the Cosbys, let's say, right? If this were the Cosbys, and somebody came in and whatever, you realize that that some sexual abuse has taken place with one of the children, in a normal family, that will be dealt with. That child would get support, maybe counseling, having some discussion, probably some legal action would take place. Some pretty healthy things should go on to try to restore that child to health if there are no ACEs in that family. What happens, and first of all, and that child would know that and rely on that, so that child would disclose. So part of the issue is that if you are a child and you experience sexual abuse, and for whatever reason you feel like there is not even safe space enough in your home where you can disclose what's going on and happening, something else is going on in that environment. Because in a normal, healthy, developing home, that environment, one of the things that happens is that children feel safe and secure, and like they have a safe place, a safe space that they can explore. That if something goes wrong, they have somebody or someone in that household to fall back on. So those secrets are not necessary to keep. So if you are a survivor and you have kept that secret, there was a reason that you kept that secret. It wasn't just in your head. It was in the household, not in your head. It's because even at 7 or 6 or 5, we're smart enough to pick up on what is and is not a safe environment. So the irony of it, though, is that we get a little dumber as we age. And so when we go back and tell 20, 30, 40 years later, somehow we expect that the response is going to be different. And it isn't. And we're like really surprised. Right? We keep wanting a different response now that we're an adult, right? But the reality is that if that was the response that you were going to get, you probably would have told when you were a child. Right? So, okay. All right, what I want you to do now, more homework assignment. Take out this sheet here, the blue sheet. Anybody not get a blue sheet? Can you help with the blue sheets? Where are the blue sheets? Do we have more blue sheets? This is an opportunity for you to get your ACE score. I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. You're going to get your ACE score. You don't have to write on this if you don't want to. Don't be peeking over on nobody else's sheet. Don't be nosy. Right? So, you don't have to write on a sheet, though. You can do it in your head. If you can add up to 10, then you can do this in your head. Now, I saw some of you didn't do all that well with those numbers up here earlier. So you might need a pencil. Okay. But you can do this in your head if you don't feel like writing it down. But what I do want you to do is that second card that you have, I want you to write your ACE score, just the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Don't go making up your own ACEs and put 12. Okay. Just the ones that are on here. So I want you to write down your ACE score on a card that should be blank now. Okay. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that the approximate percentage of high ACEs for survivors is very similar to the percentage of sexual abuse that occurs within a home. So approximately 50% or more, just over that, of adult survivors have 4 ACEs or more. Approximately 50% of people who violate children live in the same home with them. I don't think it's coincident that that number is the same. Okay, so 50% are directly related and live in a home. Then there's another 20% who are related but don't live in a home. So maybe the grandfather, the uncles, that sort of just come to visit, or you go to visit and the abuse happens. And then another 10% is someone who's a trusted family member, the clergyman, the coach, the school teacher, that sort of stuff. Only 10% of violations occur by someone who is a complete stranger to the child. Only 10%. Okay. So so the fact that 50% of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse have 4 ACEs, I think, is directly related to those ACEs occurring inside the home where the violator is. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's one of the reasons why collecting data is so important, so that we can begin to put together these sorts of assumptions. So where are we now in our journey? We know that there are over 40 million survivors of childhood sexual abuse, so we can make the assumption that 20 million of them have 4 or more ACEs. So we can assume that millions and millions and millions of families, communities, relationships, classrooms, and business environments are affected by childhood sexual abuse. Because each survivor participates in numerous environments, right? Not just a home environment. In turn, each of these environments affect the survivor. So the first nugget on the journey is this. Healthier survivors mean healthier environments everywhere. So we have to work to create safe environments for survivors. I want to give you a little piece of my experience, recent experience, and being in a safe environment. When I said DMAC is a safe environment, I know that firsthand. So this is something that it could look like. I've been living openly as a survivor since 2010, when I created the play here. Jim Stick, that I introduced before, has been one of just an absolute gem. And it's JIM is the GEM. We don't talk a lot. We talk maybe once a semester, right? I go in and he pours knowledge into my head, right? And then I walk out full, right? I only wanted a pencil. I walk out with an encyclopedia full of knowledge. So, and rarely do we talk about, he knows I'm a survivor. He has supported everything that Buzz and I have done here. He's like, what do I need, you know? So it's been a real pleasure. And all of this, obviously, again, I live openly, so all of the psych faculty know that I'm a survivor. Although I rarely talk about the experience, people know that I have experienced. They come, they support the programs every year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On October 1st of last year, my oldest brother died, who was my first violator. Now, my niece, who is 21 years old and has the maturity of a 16-year-old, doesn't know that you don't send someone text messages about death, period, right? So I got this text message when I was driving to work from West Des Moines to Ankeny. And ironically, I was talking to a friend of mine about some survivor issues on the phone, right? Raise your hand, right? So we were talking on the phone about some survivor issues. And about her issues, right? So, I mean, I'm feeling good because I'm like helping somebody, supporting somebody. I get this text, I ignore it because I'm on the phone, not because I'm trying to drive safely, but because I can't talk and text and drive. You can only do two of them. So when I get to work and park the car and hang up the phone, I said, oh, that's right, let me check my text messages. Well, I checked the message, and it's a message from my niece says, Uncle James just died. I don't know, it's kind of a blur now. I can't really tell you the full process. I can tell you that brain, like something snapped. That's all I can explain, like something like snapped. And I went into post-trauma experience. And so I called Susan back, right? It's like she just hung up from me like 5 seconds ago. And I called her back, and right, that's how it sounded. She's like what? Like that, she doesn't know how to interpret that, right? But she knows I'm a survivor, which means I can be crazy at any moment, right? So she gets me through the next couple of minutes. I don't know, and I'm like, oh. She's like, okay, you're at work, like you should call somebody because I can't, because I have class, by the way, in like 20 minutes, right? And so we hang up the phone, I'm still distraught, whatever. And so then I call Carrie Henson, who is the other dean in behavioral science, because she's a woman, right? And so I call her, but you know how women are, they're always busy, so she's not available. So I called you, and I like barely can hold, and I'm not really processing this or doing anything, right? Good with this information. So I called Jim. I don't know if I actually got Jim on the phone, or I don't know. I think I did. I think I gave him the same message, right, for, I don't know, another 10, 15 minutes. I don't know what it is. And so I managed to tell him where I am in a car. And I don't even think I told him what was wrong at this point. I was just like, I can't get out of the car, right? And it's funny, I call this the survivor cry, because most people cry like this. Survivors cry like this. like that's, so whenever I was fighting, I was doing the survivor's cry. Like we have our own boo-hoo cry, right? So he says he's going to find me. Because I can't really articulate, I'm not communicating very effectively at all. And so I don't know how long he takes to find me, because I can't really tell him where I am. So I have him like walking around. I'm like, I'm in the parking lot. Right, I think that's the information I gave him, right? And so by the time, so he arrives, and then Carrie eventually gets there somehow. And I'm in my car. And I'm stuck in the seat, and I said, and so he's like, I'm sorry, because I'm like, these are like tears of joy, and maybe only survivors will get that, the feeling of release when a violator dies. So I don't mean to sound cruel or cold, but these are literally tears of joy and sadness at over some other stuff, family issues. So I'm joyful but sad that. I'm sad that I've lived my life like this, and so he just cannot get many words out of me. He just sits there with me. I'm in a Mustang, which is about this tall. Jim, stand up. Stand up. Okay, Jim, he's like bending down to my Mustang window like this, hovering over because I can't get out the car and he can't get in the car and he's trying to figure, right? So he's just like there with me, watching me or listening to me boo-hoo, right? Eventually Carrie gets there. And so the two of them now are watching me like, like nobody's business. I cannot stop crying. I cannot speak. And so finally I get enough words out together, like, this is the brother who raped me. And he's just like, I'm so sorry. But he knew I was a survivor. It's not like we ever have this conversation or talk. He's just there with me. I can't tell you what that means to me. I'm not embarrassed because this is safe space. He's not trying to fix me because he trusts me. And he knows. He's just there with me, watching me boo-hoo through this moment of pain and trauma that I'm having. That's it. He didn't call the crisis center, although it probably crossed his mind. He didn't call the crisis center. Carrie, when Carrie got there, she similarly, so they're just like watching, waiting for me to gather myself. They didn't shove tissues in my face or try to fix me or whatever. And so finally, as I could talk a little bit, Carrie, I think, finally said, like, I don't think you can work today. And she asked me an interesting question because I didn't know, and so she's trying to have conversation with me to help me, like, to get me out of trauma mode. And so she finally asked me, what's hurting you? I don't know what the word she used, but she's like, well, what's hurting you? And I boohooed and I said, she'll never get to choose me. My mother will never get to choose me. And that's what the tears were about. I'm 50 years old. I'm crying because my mother will not ever have the chance to choose me over my violators because he's now in the grave, which I'm very happy and thrilled about, literally. But now she'll never get to choose me. So at the same time, now I feel like I have to go to my grave feeling unworthy and insignificant because I was never chosen over any of my violators. Right? It's a painful experience. And they sit with me in that pain. Until Jim's knees start hurting. And then they offer to drive me home. Right? And so finally they got to the point where they could drive me home. Right? They're like, do you want us to drive? Yes. And so they asked to drive me home. This you can laugh out a little bit. So they asked to drive me home, and I agree to let them drive me home, but I can't get out the driver's seat. Like, I'm literally like frozen in a driver's seat, and Carrie's like, and they don't want to say, like they're being like really present with me, so they don't want to say, well, get your ass out of the driving seat then, right? So they just like sit there, like Carrie, like she comes and she gets in the car and she like sits in the passenger seat, and she's like, okay, like we could drive you home, but I can't move, right? So finally we get it together, and they make the arrangement. So they finally get me out of the driver's seat, because I literally can't drive home, can't do anything. I literally can't move. And she gets in the car, and Carrie realizes then, damn it, it's a stick shift. So she drives a little bit. She sees Jim getting in his car, and then they trade. And so Jim drives me home, and we just have light, polite conversation to keep me out of trauma mode. Meanwhile, Carrie calls my husband up and lets him know from work. I mean, I'm telling you, what can happen when there is safe space is amazing for a survivor. It's amazing. So as opposed to me having to sink back into my own guilt, shame, and trauma, I was propelled forward because there was space for me to be. I didn't have to go in my classroom and pretend to be okay. I didn't have to call out of work sick and pretend to be okay. I could share where I was in that moment while they drove me all the way back to West Des Moines, followed me so they could then drive back to work. They took time out of their day to comfort a survivor in my moment of trauma, reliving some trauma and some pain. It's not that hard if you commit to creating a safe space. We don't need fixing, we need support so that we can allow ourselves to heal. It's not that difficult. So safe space can happen, not just inside your home and with your few little friends. Safe space can happen, but it can only happen if we live openly to my survivors. I can't imagine how different that day would have gone if I were still living in secret. That would not have been a day that I disclosed. It would not. I would not have chosen that day to disclose. Maybe I would have tried to come in and teach. That would have been really ugly. Or maybe I would have driven home in distraught and not made it. But on that day, I know the fact that I was living openly and the fact that people supported me in living openly and created a safe space for me was important for me and helped me to grow in my own healing. So I know that that is really possible.